Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We have Ninewood and we have Jonathan here as our presenter. This is an AIA accredited presentation, so you will be receiving credit for today's presentation. If you weren't able to fill out the form earlier or drop your registration when signing up, I'll include a link right now just to ensure that you receive credit for today's presentation. Give me 1 second. Secondly, we will be submitting a webinar survey about 45 minutes throughout the presentation. This is a great way to connect with Jonathan after the presentation through Acelab, whether it be for project-specific support, samples, or anything else that you might need. I'm going to quickly share my screen here just to show you a great way to connect with Jonathan after today's presentation. You can always go into Acelab and type in the manufacturer, clicking on that manufacturer button to find their brand page right here. Great way is just clicking this contact button. You can tie it to your firm library. You can also tie it to a specific project. They've got some really great information here about their different product lines, different certifications, and everything like that. Another great new feature that we have on Acelab, is this meet with a manufacturer landing page here. You can connect directly with them by filling out this form, requesting things like lunch and learns, CEU credits for your office, or just virtual meetings. I'll also drop this link in a chat and feel free to request them for as many or as little manufacturers as you would like. But I think that is everything. So whenever you're ready, Jonathan, I will let you take it away.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan. I work with Ninewood. And just a brief little intro. If you're not familiar with us, we're a custom wood ceiling manufacturer. That's all we do. We love wood, and I'm excited to be here. So with no further ado, I'll go through the AIA course here, and feel free to throw out any questions, in the chat, or even raise your hand regarding anything. So this course is could be basic or it could be new information. It covers suspended wood ceilings, kind of designed to delivery, kind of an introduction to custom wood ceilings, understanding the benefits of suspended wood ceilings to T-bar, the different materials that go into a wood ceiling. And then we'll also cover some critical design and functional considerations like access, acoustics, and then we'll go through the different types, aesthetics, and styles of wood ceilings that are available through all the manufacturers in our industry, and kind of look at their strengths and weaknesses in a way that hopefully is helpful and informative as if you're designing or specifying a wood ceiling. So first off, we're talking about Division 9 wood ceilings. These are wood panels or planks that are suspended by T-bar, typically 15/16. And the good news is that they're standard universal, so it's readily available. It's in almost every commercial building. And there's a lot of professional acoustical subcontractors that put up this grid all the time, and also work with wood ceiling manufacturers. It's a little bit different. Wood ceilings are heavier. They do require a heavy duty T-bar, typically 15/16, as I mentioned, but it's seismic and code compliant. It's readily available and relatively easy in that regard. And all manufacturers engineer all their wood ceiling products to attach to T-bar for the most part. Probably 98% of their systems, either through a direct screw attachment or some type of clip attachment. It's more budget friendly than millwork, which is good. And then also, I mentioned this with T-bar, is there's really unlimited lighting options. And we'll cover this a bit later on. And so there's a lot of lighting integration choices. That doesn't necessarily mean that, especially in the back end, that lighting integration goes well. There's a lot of coordination that needs to happen. And we'll kind of briefly talk about that. Wood is a beautiful material, and it can add a lot to space for a client. So it covers the plenum, and so it covers up, the HVAC and the different systems up there. But that does lead to almost a universal issue I hear from designers, is a requirement to have access, and we'll go through those options here in a bit. Also, custom wood ceiling is expensive, and so one way to provide more value to your client is through acoustics. And I will say this, the different manufacturers have a variety of different brand names and product names, but you do not need to have the word acoustic, in the wood ceiling brand or product in order to get good sound absorption, which is a more common acoustical need we see. You really just need two things. You need a percent opening, and you need some type of sound absorbing material behind the wood ceiling. And that could be just a black duct liner, black insulation, or some type of theater board. And generally those are relatively not too expensive and readily available. And the examples here show three different situations, with the percentage is a percent opening, 8%, 17%, and 52. And the different NRCs you can get with those particular configurations with 1.5-inch duct liner. And so it kind of gives you an idea. The real big idea is if acoustic sound absorption is an important requirement in a space, let the manufacturer working with know about that early on. If you're targeting a specific one or a range, so that as you're looking at different choices, different configurations, they can inform you how that impacts the percent opening and ultimately the NRC, and you can get the sound absorption you need. The other common benefit for all interior spaces is it needs to achieve a Class A. The good news here is all wood ceiling manufacturers should be able to provide all the wood ceilings with a fire rating treatment that can achieve the Class A code requirement. And there's three ways in which that is typically done. So for veneers, the fire rating material, the chemicals are put within the actual core, which will be either a particle board core or it will be an MDF core. And so when those are manufactured, the chemicals are mixed in there, and then the veneer is glued on top of the core, and that's what ultimately delivers the Class A fire rating treatment. For solid wood, soft or hardwoods, some type of topical coating, like it could be mineral-based or intumescent fire rating, has to be applied to the wood. Typically, it penetrates into the wood, and that's how the Class A rating is achieved. And then for other wood components, there might be an assembly. If you've seen like maybe a panelized grill or a panelized linear, there may be other wood products a part of that actual assembly. They need to be treated also. A common technique in that case, if there's like maybe a plywood or different wood members, a part of it is some type of pressure treatment that pushes the fire rating into it. And so manufacturers should be able to provide that for veneer, solid wood, soft, and hardwoods, and also for the wood components, and provide you not only with the product data of the fire retardant they're using, but also the testing data and everything you need. And hopefully provide the assurances. Fire rating is one of those challenging things with wood. Humans have been burning it for millennia. It's combustible. And so it does require a very rigorous and controlled process to apply that in such a way that it delivers a Class A, but doesn't create other issues in terms of the final finishing. But that all can be done. Oh, I will add this. Currently, there are potential limits with fire rating around exterior and CDPH water-based coatings. It's something manufacturers are working with the coating manufacturers like maybe Sherwin-Williams to kind of figure that out. But there are some potential limits, again, just with exterior and some water-based coatings that can cause some issues in that case. Something to be aware of. And then I'll just add this, with when you're dealing with a wood ceiling, a custom wood ceiling, oftentimes you can deal with a specialist, either with the acoustical sub, that is working with T-bar installations a lot. And in some cases, they're working with, wood ceiling installations often, or with a particular manufacturer. And that expertise can provide value, and that they're not just providing, wood planks or panels, but they're providing all the expertise, which shows up in maybe the specific Revit families, CADs, collateral, engineering support, specific install guides, and stuff like that. And as you can see here in this photo, this is something that might look like, more of a Division 6 millwork situation, but with the right expertise, outcomes like this can be delivered successfully too. Um, Now I'll go into the wood ceiling materials. And again, throw out any questions if you have them. And so there's solid, veneer, finishes, there's scrims and fabrics and hardware. I'm going to predominantly focus on the first three here, kind of going over the different materials. Solid wood. Wood, obviously, everyone loves wood. It's a beautiful material, but it does have natural color variation and character variation. And the color is really driven. If you look at the diagram on the bottom left there of the log, that really shows what drives that. So each species will have certain ranges of color variation, regardless of the quality of the board you're sourcing. And that's what drives that. When it's milled, it's going to have that. A great example of that is cedar. If you've seen cedar, like maybe at Home Depot, has a lot of color variation from very light blonde to dark brown colors and everything in between, which can be exactly what you want, but it really depends on the design intent and maybe client expectations. And so if you are wanting to control or better kind of dial in the natural color variation, the first decision is to choose the right species. So make sure you get all the samples, ideally even photos of installed spaces with the species and project you're looking at, so you can get a good perspective early on of what that variation is going to be, what it's going to look like, and you can make an informed decision. The other benefit of solid wood is it's suitable for exteriors. Each manufacturer will have their go-to, solid wood species for exterior situations, so you can deliver more longevity in those exterior applications for your client. It's field cut friendly. Veneers can be field cut, but solid wood doesn't require any special end banding. And the manufacturers can set up subs, to make the field cut successfully and touch up any visible ends, with a particular stain and or finish. And oftentimes, most projects, due to schedule limitations, ultimately end up with a field cutting situation, which can be done successfully. And there's lots of options with solid wood. You have profiles up a 1x2 to 2x6, lengths up to 12 feet. That can vary a little bit depending on the species. And you have two grain choices. And here I'll cover those now. Mixed grain, which is available in all wood species. And the diagram really shows what you're getting into here. So when they mill it up, there will be kind of a random distribution as shown there in those two kind of extreme examples of more of a cathedral looking grain and more of like tight grain pattern and everything in between. It's just not sorted out. It's kind of random. But again, as you look at these photos, it really depends on the space and look you're achieving. This can actually look great and beautiful, and it's more budget friendly than the other option, which is vertical grain, or sometimes it's called quarter sawn. And so this is where the mills, when they're taking the logs and cutting at the boards, they will sort it out, for the tighter grain pattern, so it's more consistent. That does have an additional cost to it, and that cost can vary depending on species. So it's hard to kind of nail down, but it will have a premium, for the sorting, and there's some waste in the process too. But it will provide a more consistent grain pattern, for your project. And so the key idea is, if you're entertaining maybe one or the other and don't know, get samples early on and get the real-time budget info you need for that particular species, and actually for the profile size too, which can affect cost. So you know what you're getting into before you get too far down the road and specify a product. And we're dealing with a natural material, and it's a custom wood ceiling. So there are some things to consider, some potential gotchas. One area with solid wood, and this is true of soft and hardwoods, is there's no single ceiling grade. Each manufacturer will source their solid woods regionally, and so they're going to be different. Some of them change over time in terms of what their standard species offering is in solid wood. And so again, it's really key early on to get samples of the different options available, and ideally even photos of installed spaces of what you're thinking about, so you can really get a good idea of and better definition of the color variation and the character variation you're going to be looking at. And another thing to keep in mind is that stains can provide more color consistency. So the first decision, if you want to better kind of control or set up the color variation in a natural wood, is choose the right species. Don't play to its weaknesses. Like if you want a tighter color control, don't pick cedar. Pick another species like maybe hemlock or something. But stains can be an option. So if they're a part of your potential design, look at stain samples up against kind of the clears, so you can see how that affects the color variation, in particular more on the extreme ends. And another thing that's true of all wood products is yield does impact budget. And I'm highlighting two areas here that are important. And the first one is random or shorter lengths provide the best yield, i.e. they're probably going to be more budget friendly. Some systems or your designs may not accommodate shorter lengths, but it's something to keep in mind. For example, a wood flooring is kind of planks that are progressively installed. Well, each manufacturer has kind of an equivalent type of system in a ceiling application, usually as a reveal between the planks. And that could be a great application for using random or shorter links, which would be more budget friendly than longer links potentially. And so you can ask early on about those two options if you're interested in a system like that, and make sure you can see the end results through photos and samples and make a good decision there. Um, the other thing to keep in mind is the difference between net and nominal. So if you've been to Home Depot and you're looking at like a structural 2x4 and you ever measured it, you realize it's not a 2-inch net by 4-inch net. It's actually an 1.5 inch by 3.5 inch net, right? But they call it a 2x4. Well, all the wood ceiling manufacturers provide solid wood in the same way, whether it's soft or hardwoods. And so 1x2 isn't a 1-inch net by 2-inch net. It's like a 3/4 by 1 3/8 and so on. So if you specify 1 inch, that means the manufacturer is going to be thinking you want a 1-inch net, which will require them to purchase a 2x material and mill it down. There's a lot more waste and it's less sustainable and it's more cost. So make sure you find out what their nominal sizes are and you specify them, unless of course you really do want a 1-inch net or a 2-inch net, but find out what that premium pricing impact will be to buy the oversized kind of blank that they'll have to mill down. But these are things to be aware of, and just reach out to your manufacturers. Hey, what are your standard sizes? And do random or shorter links potentially work in the ceiling I'm looking at? And can I see some photos and samples? Veneers are different than solid wood when it comes to grades. Unlike solid wood, which is sourced regionally, veneers are pretty much sourced from the same forest, maybe even some of the same suppliers, and they have a standard grade. It's universal across all wood ceiling manufacturers, the Hardwood Plywood Veneer Association. And they come, as I mentioned, in a particle board core or MDF core, and both are fire rated. And I think that is pretty universal. And again, the fire treatment is put into the wood. Just like solid wood can be treated, veneers can too, and the veneer is glued on those cores, and that's how it achieves a Class A. It's more consistent in grain and color than solid wood, kind of apples to apples. So if you're dealing with a species that has a solid wood availability and a veneer, the veneer generally will have a bit more consistency in grain and color, which can be good if you're really wanting to kind of limit the variation. You can, first choice, right, choose the right species, play to its strengths, not its weaknesses in terms of color variation and character. The next choice is maybe looking at veneer. It won't eliminate, the color variation, but it can potentially kind of dial it in a little bit and give you a little bit more control for your project and your client. And just you got to check out the samples and look at some photos. And again, in terms of budget impact, veneers, apples to apples, are less expensive than a solid wood, soft or hardwood. It depends on the configuration, but if you're looking at the same amount of wood, like comparing, 1x3 to 1x3 in a veneer and a solid, maybe I'm picking an extreme example, like maybe it's teak, 1x3 and a teak veneer 1x3, the veneer will be less expensive for the same amount in a particular plank or panel. And so it's another option to potentially dial in your budget. And in a ceiling application, it can still look really good. Also, veneers can be, CNC'd or shaped to curves. And depending on what you're doing, it can be more time intensive and expensive than other ways, but that is a possibility. So bring it up early if you're needing that type of situation where you're looking at veneers, particularly curve, and find out what the parameters are for the particular style you're looking at. There will be limits or parameters that the manufacturer can work within that are going to be more budget friendly and have less of a lead time impact. And the other thing I'll add too with veneers, they all come in 4 foot by 8 foot sheets, sometimes a 4 foot by 10 foot sheet. And so the good news there is with a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet, you can get whatever size you want, with respect to whatever system you're getting from the manufacturer. There may be some parameters there, but the sky's the limit within the sheet. And like solid wood, you do have some choices in terms of grain patterns, and I'll go through these here. And I'm going to cover 3 of the more common, which is a plain sawn, quarter sawn, and rift sawn. And the diagrams show the milling and kind of why the cost increases as you go from plain to rift sawn. There's more processing time at the mill and there's more waste in the log. and that's really what drives the cost impact. And these can vary depending on species. And so you just need to find out, what's available and what the cost impact is, so you can make an informed choice. Um, and it really kind of depends too on the application. This is a Sacramento International Airport there in the photo. That's a white maple plain sawn, plain sliced, which looks great in that application and is more budget friendly than a quarter sawn or another option. So things to be aware of. And just like with solid wood, it's a natural material and you're dealing with, a custom wood ceiling. So there are some things to consider, some potential gotchas here. And just like with solid wood, yield does impact budget and actually impacts sustainability too. So one thing to keep in mind is the sky is a limit, within a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet. You can get whatever size you want. With that said, if you specify a 4 foot 1 inch panel, the manufacturer will buy a full 4 foot by 8 foot sheet, and they're going to have to cut off a 3 foot 15 inch offall that's going to go into the recycle or waste bin. So it will be more expensive. If you want to maximize yield, stick within the 2, 4, and 8 foot modules. That's going to be more ideal in that regard, more sustainable, better on budget. And so if you can accommodate those modules, that's going to definitely benefit you in your project. The other thing, as I mentioned, unlike solid wood, which is sourced regionally, the veneers have a universal grade. And so that means there's really two common grades for a veneer panel tile, as you see in the photo, or like a grill in the diagram below. It's an A grade for the face of the grill member, the most visible surface, or the tile surface in the photo, and a B grade like for the edges of the veneers. And that's fairly universal across most manufacturers. Looks great, but again, you can get samples showing you that. And like with solid wood, stains can provide more color consistency. They're not going to eliminate color variation, but they can help kind of reduce it a bit. And so again, if natural color variation is something you want to better kind of control or dial in on your project, the first decision is to choose the right species, plate its strengths with regard to color variation. The next decision is solid versus veneer. Apples to apples, veneer typically has more consistency in color. The third is potentially a stain. And so there are ways to potentially kind of better provide a little bit more color consistency, never eliminate it. And that's really the three choices. And so again, get samples early on from the manufacturer, let them know what your expectations are, find out what can be done, within your budget, and then you can arrive at the right, wood to specify species and whether veneer, solid, and stain. Finishes. I'm not going to go in depth into finishes, but in interiors, there's three basic options manufacturers provide. So there's a catalyzed lacquer, which has been around for decades, ultraviolet coatings, which isn't talking about the resistance to UV. It's actually talking about how they're dried, or the technical term is cured. So the coating is hit with the UV light and it instantly dries. Common in like flooring, and it's more durable, but it's thicker. It kind of hides the wood a little bit more in that regard, more of a plasticky look, not as necessary in a ceiling, but and then water-based. And one thing to keep aware of in water-based for interior situations is there are currently some compatibility issues between the fire rating applied to the solid wood, whether soft or hardwood, and the water-based treatments. Manufacturers are working on dialing in that technology, but that can be an issue. It's why a catalyzed lacquer is very common as a choice. For exteriors, oftentimes it's going to be urethane, which is important. You want to get the durability you need for your client, like in an exterior soffit, like in the photo there. And so you want to specify the right coating. And then stains come in two fashions. If they're a lighter stain, the pigments and dyes may be put within the coating itself and applied at one time, or the stain may be applied separately through some type of spray equipment or line. And it's never wiped on like something you do at home or in a project or like that. They have no wipe on stains. They're applied usually through some type of spray application and more of a factory assembly line approach. And I would add this, the photo shows a good example where You have an interior and exterior space. It's visible from one vantage point. One thing to keep in mind is that the sheens, how light kind of reflects off the coating for interior and exterior is oftentimes different. And it's pretty standard. It's not easy to change that. Manufacturers may not be able to do that in a controlled way. So just be aware. So if you do have situations like here at the Brookfield Zoo, make sure you get samples of the different, the exterior sheen and the interior sheen so you can see the differences to make sure that it fits your expectations, and oftentimes it can, but it's something to be aware of. And they're different in that regard, and they're not easily modified or customized. There's a lot of challenges to do that. So now I'll go into some, critical design and functional considerations, and feel free to, you can save your questions for the end or shoot them out, in the chat. Accessibility, I hear this is almost a universal need to some extent in almost every space. Wood provides this beautiful product covering the plenum, but how do you get access? And that can be a bigger deal, even if your client is like schools, things like that, where maintenance is a stakeholder, has a lot more expectations in terms of what they want out of that. And so the three questions there really line out what you need to provide to the manufacturer. And even if you don't know the answer to all of them, bring this up early. Hey, access is a concern. Here's why. Here's what we're thinking. So as you're looking at different styles and product options and configurations, the manufacturer can inform you of how that impacts the accessibility. Not all systems can deliver a full access solution. Some have no accessibility, and so that is pretty important to get that out on the table early on, and have that discussion as you move forward before you settle on a product. There's full, spot, and limited access, and I'll go through the typical solutions, in our industry. So for full access, these are the most common, and I show a tile here, a flat tile system, but actually these can be done with like a panelized grill or a panelized linear, a variety of different products potentially. And so the lay-in, is fairly simple, works well. There are two things to consider with a lay-in system. First is you have to have enough plenum space. They can actually lift it up and get it out, right? And so if you don't have enough plenum space, that's going to potentially be an issue. And be wary of having big 4 foot by 4 foot tiles. It's going to be very challenging for maintenance, like two people getting it out, and that can be very awkward too. So it's better suited to those situations where it's smaller, like a 2 by 2. Um, Also, if it's in a seismic zone, it will require additional hardware, which can be provided, but that does mean that it's maybe not as easy to get down. There's different things that have to be attached and reattached by maintenance. The alternative is a torsion or tension flange system. And that provides a system that is seismic compliant. And in case of like the tension flange, it can actually be disengaged. It can hinge, never touches the ground. It can be single person access. Obviously, there's a cost to that, in a full space situation, but it could be a great option for the maintenance department or your client, depending on what their needs are and what they need to require. And actually here, going back, the photo on the right is one of those systems. So it gives you kind of maybe a little bit better visual of what that looks like. The other option is spot access. And maybe you don't need full access throughout an entire space, or maybe your budget can't quite afford that. Well, the next option is these two, and these are common in our industry. And they provide two big benefits. One is flexibility and budget friendly. They're budget friendly because you're not putting access everywhere. You're only putting access where you need it. They're flexible because both systems can be coordinated in shop drawings, and even actually locations can be determined during installation. And so everything doesn't have to be exactly planned out in detail. You do need to know how many you're going to potentially need because it needs to be bid that way, but the exact locations can be coordinated between the manufacturer, sub, and yourself, even later on during shop drawings or even during install. The top one is a field cut access panel. So if you specify, like this is showing a panelized grill, maybe it's a 1 foot by 10 foot, the manufacturer provides a kit. The acoustical subcontractor cuts out basically a lay-in panel out of it with additional hardware provided by the manufacturer, and it lays in. In the seismic zones, it will require different tie-offs above to make it seismic, but it's fairly simple, straightforward, and flexible. It is visible from below to some degree. You'll see where it sits. The bottom option is what is called a caddy clip. And so if you specified, for example, 1 foot by 10 foot, panelized grill, the manufacturer takes the exact module with a slightly different backer with a hole in it, and the same heavy duty, 15/16 grid is used, but there's a little clip that locks onto it with a bolt. It's seismic compliant, and the panels are located within whatever, layout you've had approved in the shop drawings. And so they can locate those wherever. And so they blend in perfectly. It is a little slower to pull down. It would at least require two people. You got to kind of pull up the black acorn nuts, take the panel down, set it on the ground. But again, I think in situations where, budget and flexibility and you don't need it in the whole space is important, these can be a great spot access solution, for your system. And I'll add this, that the photo shows kind of the opposite where it's not accessible. I mentioned this before. So in ceiling systems that are ultimately installed like a flooring, if you ever put a flooring in your home, you start at the perimeter and you go out, you can't just pull up a plank in the middle, right? And so some of those ceiling applications are installed the same way. This one does have a reveal between the plank, but it's progressively installed like a flooring, which means you can't just get access easily in the center. Those systems are not access friendly. And so definitely don't go down that road if you need frequent or spot access. So something to be aware of. And again, just mention that requirement and need up front with the manufacturer so they can help inform your decisions, before you get down too far down the road. And definitely want to avoid, reworking your specification. The last one I'll mention is what we call a limited access. So some systems, as I mentioned, are designed to have a direct screw attachment into the 15/16 heavy duty grid. The good news here is you can deinstall them, which means technically they are accessible. So this works great as kind of a backup options for a client. They don't need full access. Maybe there isn't budget for other access solutions, and there's no plan to really get up there on a regular basis, but maybe there's a concern, in an emergency situation or a rare situation. I want to at least know I can get up there if necessary. These two different products can provide that. On the left, a panelized grill, on the right, a panelized linear, and you can deinstall them. And maintenance can get up there to get access. The thing to keep in mind in this situation is that if they end up like, unscrewing and rescrewing, the same hole repeatedly again and again and again, frequently, we'll strip out the hole, maintenance off the pop and screws in different spots and different angles, and the alignment of the grill can get a little wonky. And so uh, great as kind of a backup, rare situation, you have that kind of peace of mind with your client, but it's not good if you really need kind of a more frequent spot access or full access solution, but something to be aware of. And that's really the three options in the industry. Each manufacturer may have a particularly different, maybe variation or name of their products, but just let them know ahead of time and let them give you the choices you need to make a good decision. I kind of repeating acoustics, wood ceilings are expensive. They need to deliver more value for a client. One of the ways to do that is through sound absorption, NRCs. And so this just adds another percent there. And as I mentioned, some products will have acoustic in the name, others won't. Well, it really doesn't depend on that. It depends on percent opening and having some sound absorbing material behind the product. And the sound absorbing materials are readily available. It could be duct liner, insulation, or theater board. And you can see here in the examples again, you can actually get some pretty good NRCs. It really depends on the configuration and the percent opening for the system. And each system might actually perform a little bit different with regard to the sound and stuff. And that's why get the testing data, let them know what you're after, and make sure you ultimately end up specifying something with the percent opening and performance you need. Lighting integration. As I mentioned, grid, really lighting is kind of the unlimited in terms of what's available and going to work with the grid. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the coordination and install is easy. I get a lot of feedback that the integration is one of the bigger problems we hear about. You have a lighting manufacturer, wood ceiling manufacturer, an acoustical subcontractor, and they're not all necessarily working together, and there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen. So with that said, obviously the coordination is essential. Some of that can be done, or you can specify, in a more correct way to help that. Shop drawings can be helpful, and then having installation guides can be helpful. And as you add more layers, it can get more complicated too. So if you have a lot of lighting that's custom and needs to be attached in specific ways, and you have access needs, and you have other fixtures, then definitely that needs to be coordinated, ideally in shop drawings and through the installation to make sure that things are correct. And you don't have situations like you have a sprinkler like in the photo below that's meant to be centered and it's off to the right or something like that, which can happen. So lots of different options, but make sure the manufacturer can help provide a plan and the drawings you need to get the coordination, with the lighting you're specifying and the drawings required for the acoustical sub to make sure it's done, correctly to avoid those pitfalls and issues. Color matching, wood's a wonderful product to stain. In a lot of cases, it can actually, bring out even more beauty in the wood. It can look really great. All manufacturers provide standard stains, but wood ceilings are an expensive premium material, so you deserve to get the exact color and tone you need. So make sure the manufacturer can provide custom stain matches that enables you to dial in the exact color and tone you need. Maybe you're matching millwork, maybe it's a specific color you want in an area, and that should be able to be done, with as many samples as you need to get that dialed in the way you need with your client and deliver that result. And then I'll hit budgets here. We're dealing with a custom, material, natural material. And so there's certain things that can have a big impact on budget. Some of them are obvious. Some of them maybe not so. So I'll kind of go through them here real quickly. The first one is species. That's the biggest factor in driving budget. If you specify a more exotic species like solid teak, a 1x4, that's going to be very, very expensive. It could be over $100 a foot, for whatever wood ceiling product you're getting. So if you stick with the manufacturer's standard species, those are generally going to be much more budget friendly. Doesn't mean the other can't be supplied, but there's the cost trade-off, budget impact. And oftentimes in a ceiling, you can actually deliver looks with the more exotic, with some of the standard species of those custom stain matches also. The other thing is wood size, and generally this makes sense. The more wood you have in the panel or the system, the higher the cost. The one thing that might not be commonly known is uh, different profile sizes, like going from a 1x2 to a 1x4 or a 2x6, uh, don't necessarily have proportionate cost increases. They can be disproportionate. Like a 2x6 can be significantly more expensive than a 1x2. And it depends on the species. It's really driven by the supply chain, the availability of that quality at that larger profile. And so if you're looking at, larger profiles and sizes, make sure you get that, the budget information, impacts on the cost differences early on. So you know what you're getting into, because that can impact budget. And then of course, like unique sizes, if you have like dozens of sizes that require factory cutting or field cutting coordination, that's going to drive up, time and cost. And then complex geometries, ultra customization, where you're getting to like having to actually do engineering to figure out how to attach it to maybe unique suspension, things like that. A lot of that can be done, but it's going to be more expensive and have a significant impact on lead times. And then of course, project scope. That's an obvious one. The more wood you have in the ceiling space, the more costly. I had heard this from actually one firm where the statement is, it doesn't take a very large wood ceiling to have a big impact on your client space. And so sometimes a smaller cloud or accent ceiling gives you, fully beautiful, good quality wood ceiling without all the scope there. And so if you're looking for options like that, to limit the budget impact, make sure the manufacturer ideally loves working with small wood ceilings, right? And they can provide you the service samples and support you need, but that can be a great option to bring the wood into the space, without the huge giant like throughout everywhere kind of impact. So, and those are just some basic ranges there, giving you an idea of what you can see. Lead, right off the bat, I'm not going to cover sustainability, just going to hit lead here. Sustainability is a pretty big topic and important with wood. But with lead, there's two credits that are probably the most common and easier to get with wood across probably all the manufacturers. The first one is the certified and then the recycled content. So the veneers come on either particle board core or MDF, and that generally can achieve the recycled content point. And then the certified either comes in FSC or PEFC. it really is driven by where the regional solid woods or veneers are coming from and the forests, how the forests are managed. But those are the two most common across the US and Canada where a lot of the wood is sourced. And so, but it can still get your lead point if that's, what you're needing for your project. So something to be aware of. The others are potentially possible depending, but less common and a little bit harder to get, like the rapidly renewable. There's really not any good options here aside from bamboo, which is a grass. And so just to be aware of that. Here, let me. Okay, so types of wood. I'll get into the different styles and kind of look at their strengths and weaknesses. Hopefully this will be helpful. So with cubes, it can be modular or monolithic. As you can see there in the photos, there's full or spot access solutions. So you have a lot of accessibility choices available. And obviously, as you can see the photos, there's a lot of percent opening. So as long as up above somewhere you have some sound absorbing material, you can get some good sound absorption NRCs. And it's solid or veneer. So it gives you a lot of different choices in terms of color variation, character, and potentially sizes and spacings. A lot of different choices there with the cube. Acoustic plank provides a really unique kind of curve reveal linear look. It is progressively installed, kind of like the flooring, wood flooring, but in a ceiling application, which means it's not accessible. So if you do need access in any form, this is not the right solution, for a project. There is percent opening, and just check with the manufacturer the different options available and NRCs it can be achieved with whatever sound absorbing material they recommend. And it's veneer only, but that still provides, quite a few options. There's a lot of standard, veneer species choices and custom choices there. You have different slicing options available for different looks. So quite a bit of different choices there. Grills, we see this product, often. It comes in a modular system, which means that if you have like in that ceiling there, if you have like a 20 or 30-foot run, you cannot procure solid wood, whether soft or hardwood, and 30-foot lengths. And so typically the modules would maybe an 8-foot or 10-foot length, and they'll have a half-inch reveal between the abutting grill members. That achieves two things. One, enables you to achieve the span, but the half-inch reveal provides protection in two ways. There's just normal tolerances, in the manufacture, the grid, and the installation, which helps kind of avoid that standing out. And the other thing is wood is, the technical term is hygroscopic. And so it continues to move, even in interior environments, that have HVAC, as the relative humidity changes, the wood will, shrink and expand. And sometimes it can be significant depending on the situation, even in a normal building. And so over time, that half-inch reveal helps prevent that kind of variation from standing out versus if you had a really small 1/8-inch reveal, even a 30-second deviation might read if you're looking down a long reveal line, and you want to avoid that. So you need the right reveal to help deal with just the normal kind of accumulated tolerances wood movement. It has good percent opening. You may remember from the two prior slides, with grills in the right configuration, you can get NRCs of like 0.95 or even 1, but it really depends on the configuration. There's scrim or fabric options that can be between the wood member and the grid. It can block out the plenum. They're typically acoustically transparent, but it can provide more contrast. When it comes to scrims, there can be some pitfalls or even nightmare realities. So make sure you find out what the parameters are from the manufacturer to avoid those. For example, if you have a fabric going over too long of a span between wood members, it can sag. And so you want to make sure you don't get to that situation. The other problem that can happen is if the system is maybe not quite the right one for installation or installation over Torx. A lot of fabrics and scrims can have memory, and so that twist and stuff that happens can read, and it's especially a problem if you have a lot of critical lighting. Like if you have huge, large windows and you have a lot of critical lighting coming in during the day where a lot is visible, that can definitely be an issue. So you just need to make sure you follow the parameters right? To avoid sag, the right system that actually aligns well with installation, and then make sure the installation is done appropriately to avoid those issues. And if you have critical lighting, bring it up with the manufacturer to make sure you don't run into those pitfalls. Um, there's a lot of choices with a grill. So I'll go through a few here. This is like a 2x3 member, and a lot of different designs in the installation space, as you can see there, that can be done. A lot of different choices. A 1x2, the multi-plane system there. 1x4 is a deeper member grill. And so there's just a lot of choices. And look, and you can also stain it too. Linear wood. So with linear wood, there's two types of options from pretty much most manufacturers: a progressive or a modular install. So with progressive, we're talking about a plank system like this. So again, this is installed kind of like a wood flooring, but in a ceiling application with a reveal between the planks. And so it's not accessible. And so this isn't the right choice if you need access of any form. And here you can see in that diagram the fabric, so that provides the felt, more contrast between the wood and the reveal, and can block out the grid. It can be random or staggered. So again, if you remember from the solid wood, random and shorter lengths can provide potentially more budget-friendly option. This is a great system to find out if that's available and what the budget impact is of the manufacturer. And it comes in solid or veneer. So you have quite a few different choices in terms of, natural color, natural character, different aesthetics, and texture and wood species. And also walls. Some manufacturers can provide a wall application, which can be great in this situation. Like in the photo, you don't want to source that from two different manufacturers. You want to ideally have it the same wood, the same finish, same staining, so it matches perfectly. And then the other one is a linear panelized. And so this is similar to the panelized grill, except there's a horizontal wood member. And just like with the grills, you cannot get a 20 or 30-foot long member. So you're going to have smaller modules, whatever that is, 8 or 10 or maybe 12 feet with that half-inch reveal between them typically. Sometimes it's a 3/8. And that helps, again, deal with just normal tolerances through it, fabrication, installation, and wood movement. So it doesn't read over time. Um, and there's a lot of access options, just like with the grills. You have full, limited, or spot access. So you have a lot of choices there. There's some percent opening, so some NRCs can be achieved, but again, let the manufacturer know what you're targeting early on, so that can be done. And there's solid veneer, so there's a lot of different choices in species in that regard. Tiles, very classic look. It's modular, so there are surrounding reveals, typically a 3/8 reveal. There's a lot of access choices. They're don't they're reflective, so they don't have sound absorption unless you put holes in them. And there's two ways of doing that. Perforated means it's big holes, like 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch. They're visible. The other option is a microperf, really tiny holes that you're not going to see from below, but they do allow the sound waves to go through and you can get some sound absorption. Just find out what the cost impacts are um, to help you out there. And also remember in terms of yield, you can get any size you want out of a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet when it comes to veneer, but if you stay on a 2, 4, or maybe 8-foot module, maybe you're doing a 2-foot by 8-foot tile, that's going to produce better yield, be more sustainable. And so just find out from the manufacturer what choices are available and what that budget impact is before you specify something like a 4-foot, 6-inch panel. And here's a 2x2 LAN. This is a full access system. It does require additional hardware for seismic, and you got to have enough plenum space to get it out of there. This is a tension flange system, single person access. It hinges, doesn't touch the ground. And then baffles. Baffles is one of the systems that doesn't always go into grid. Typically, they're big members, and there's a lot of space between them in the designs. And so designers don't want to minimize the visibility of the suspension. So it can be an aircraft cable. The photo, I believe, shows like a unistrut. And so there's different options there from manufacturers to achieve that look, depending on what design you have. And then wood waves. I will add this is depending on which way you bend wood, it potentially can be easier and less expensive than you might think. And so one option that could be available, depending on which manufacturer you're working with, is like a grill wave or a linear wave. And this is achieved in this case with a flexi metal backer. And it can achieve radii up to like, 1 foot. You can have a lot of the same configuration choices and lengths that you have in a normal panelized grill or panelized linear situation. So it's something to keep in mind. It is available. There are parameters that are important that you'll need to find out from the manufacturer. So if you have very deep member grills and a tight radius, it can segment and maybe look funky. So just find out what the best parameters are to achieve that look and get samples, and ideally look at some photos of installed spaces with what you're looking at so you can see the end result too, and make an informed choice there. Well, that's the CEU. I hope this was informative or helpful. And are there any questions? Anything at all?
I'll see if some people drop some in the chat. Jonathan, feel free to get into the other segment of the presentation for now, and I'll monitor the chat as you get into it, if that works out.
Yeah, okay. I did want to share this, now that we're through the CEU, and I'm glad to answer any questions, is Nine Wood, we're a wood sealing specialist. That's all we do. We actually love wood. We've worked with it for decades. We created a new tool, an online design tool, as we listened to a lot of issues that architects and designers had, in particular working with manufacturers, is getting, custom wood ceilings are complicated, right? And you're either kind of left with kind of off the choice, limited options, and maybe not the exact service you need, or you get into the custom side. And I remember one architectural firm said custom's a 4-letter word. There's things, issues there, unpredictable service turnaround times, hard to get the info you need, whatever. This is really meant to give you a fully custom wood ceiling, but to make it a lot easier to get the information you need. And so you can go to our site, you can log in, and it has all the different systems here. You can look at it in real time. And so it puts everything right at your fingertips. And we're adding more species. We're going to add in Doug fir, numerous different other choices. We love doing color matches. So you have unlimited color matches. There's no size requirement. So you can do a 30 square foot cloud, not a problem. And you get budget information. So as you're looking at different systems, like I said, you add more wood, you get the budget impact right there in real time. And so you can see that, look at more photos, and you have access to this. You have your Revit families, which are important. And if you're doing material research, you can quickly download info you need based on what systems maybe you're thinking about, to dial in kind of the parameters, your budget, HPDs, and see if all these data sheets here, and you can get samples to validate, what you're designing. So not only do you have photos here, but you got to see it, right? In a sample, you can order as many as you want. You do a quick login so you can get your ship to address and track them. You can send them to your client. You can send them to your office. Maybe you're working from home. You can send them to home or all three. It's not a problem. It's unlimited. As many as you need, to get the custom stain matches. All custom stain matches are delivered in 5 days. Um, uh, Sample lead times are 3 days. And so, and again, a full lineup. We have our, nano perf, a micro perf, all the different choices here. So you really aren't limited. There's hundreds of thousands of different configurations. And then a photo library, thousands of photos, which I know is great to not only look at designs, but potentially communicate to your client what the space is going to look like, right? It can be hard to visualize that. And if you do find something you like, and you can pin it. Go here, you click it up, you can look at other options, you can start configuring, look at the budget impacts. So it's all right there at your fingertips, like I said, and lots of different choices to choose from. Here's the wood. We have but that's the idea. We really wanted to help solve that problem. To have all this information at your fingertips, you have a fully custom wood ceiling, and ideally it should save you time, in getting the info you need. And we also realize too, like with lighting integration, sometimes you need to talk to a human being, right? You can't get everything here. So we've set aside reserved capacity with our technical experts so they can be available whenever you need them. Like even jump on a call right now or schedule it at your convenience so you can talk about the custom, maybe the lighting integration issue or perimeter condition, and get whatever information you need in addition to the site. So anyway, I just wanted to share this, and I hope it's of value. I've got a lot of good feedback, from designers and architects. And so anyway, Are there any questions? No questions. Good.
Yeah, I think you explained everything super thoroughly, Jonathan. So thank you so, so much. Lots of people have requested to connect after the presentation today.
Okay,
So you'll be able to answer any of their questions there as well.
good. Well, I really appreciate the time. Thank you. I hope this was informative CEU, and
Yeah.
good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Okay,
I'm looking forward to chatting again soon. Have a great day, everyone.
okay. Bye.
Bye.